You know, sometimes I sit here and wonder, why me?
Did you see what you were wearing?
You deserved it.
Why is this happening?
You're lying.
You shouldn't have been. When will this just stop?
You know you want it.
You're lying.
You're such a slut. You're drinking too much, lying. You provoked it.
Well, you never said no. What a whore. You were asking.
Shouldn't have been alone.
You were asking.
What is wrong with you?
All I want is silence.
And they tell a disturbing story.
Shocking allegations of rape.
Been arrested and charged of raping and bribing two women.
Sentenced him to just 5 months in prison for that crime.
I feel like society would say rape culture doesn't exist. They would probably say rape is a serious thing, and yet you could make a joke about it and they wouldn't even realize that they're partaking in rape culture.
This is something that I didn't want to talk about because I was afraid, either one, people wouldn't believe me because, that never happens, or man, I'm just making it up.
I had never been warned about that kind of thing. I'd never been told, what to do if it had happened, and then it came out of nowhere. And I was, as an 8th grader, what do you know in 8th grade?
No one expects it to happen to them.
I feel like people don't expect that. They don't think about it. People literally don't wake up in the morning and say, hey, I'm gonna be sexually assaulted today. I'm gonna be raped.
If they expected something was gonna happen, they would at least prepare for it.
A lot of kids go walk to the bus thinking, hey, I'm gonna go on the bus today. They don't think about, I'm gonna go to the bus, there's a chance I might be attacked.
You shouldn't have to expect it.
It scares them to even think about one day that could happen to you.
Sometimes it happens at a party. Sometimes it happens in your own home by someone you trust.
You don't see it happening until it's too late.
Thing I remember was it was the typical creepy guy in the alleyway. I mean, as you can tell, it's a big alleyway, but it's still back here, and it's far enough away from houses that you scream for help and nobody's gonna hear you. So yeah, I got pulled back here, and bad things happened. The one thing that I really wish still to this day is that somebody had told me that it wasn't my fault. Because at the time I didn't believe it. The incident itself was really bad. But I think the worst part about it all was the aftermath of it.
Slut shaming in no way is fair to anyone.
I see slut shaming all the time.
You're kind of pissing me off a little more than usual.
I'm sorry if I think it's a best friend's duty to let her know that everyone, and I do mean everyone, is calling her a dirty skank.
I feel like slut shaming has two different sides to it. The shaming part and the blaming part. And the shaming part is the typical, your shorts are too short.
You're showing too much cleavage, you're showing too much skin. It's more than that. It's more than just how many sexual partners have you had, and let me tell you why that's wrong. It's you can't wear this and you can't wear that. You can't do your hair like this, you wear too much makeup.
Gina, you're wearing sweatpants. It's Monday. So that's against the rules, and you can't sit with us.
And then there's blaming, which I think that blaming is almost the most vicious part of the whole cycle, aside from, the initial attack.
The most common thing that people think of is like, oh, where you're walking alone and you were wearing something skimpy, so you probably were attacked because of that.
Skimpy clothing does not excuse rape in any reality with any logical human being.
Do I necessarily want to see a girl or a guy in particularly skimpy clothing that, shows their underwear off to the world or a little bit too much skin? Not necessarily, but do I think that's justification for them to get attacked? No.
Okay, so we're all here because of this book, right? Well, I don't know who wrote this book, but you all have got to stop calling each other sluts and whores. It just makes it okay for guys to call you sluts and whores. Who here has ever been called a slut?
Number one place that we see slut shaming is the most exposed it could ever be, and it's in the media. You know, magazines, comedians.
I remember back when Snooki was pregnant with her first kid, a bunch of comedians, they were all commenting on how many guys she had slept with.
Apparently Snooki's pregnant.
Snooki is pregnant.
She's already 3 months along.
Who got her pregnant?
Well, that's unclear.
Even though they don't really know that number. Not that the number really matters.
You know, kids are gonna grow up thinking that this is okay just because of normality, or what's considered normal anyway.
After an incident happens, I think a lot of victims have so much fear and shame and self-blame that it keeps them from reporting it, fearing that they had some role in it.
They don't want to feel like they've been raped again by having everybody ask them questions.
Even what you have to go through after a rape, if you go to an emergency room, the exam is very invasive and you can't clean up. And so that's probably the last thing that you want to do after an incident like that.
The worst thing I have heard someone say is, "It's not my problem. I'm not in that situation, so I don't have to do anything about it."
I think as a culture, us going through something like that and then just not helping somebody else that went through something like that, that's not right. It's not okay.
I think the reason that rape culture prevails as well as it does is because a lot of people think that by staying silent, it's okay.
It's kind of like the monster under the bed. If you just think he's not there, then he's not there. But rape is different because it is there. And just not thinking about it isn't going to help anything.
When I was raped, it was at a party, and you know, people did see it. Several people saw it, and you know, nobody said anything. Nobody tried to stop it. Nobody even treated me different afterwards. And then, you know, I think that's something that kind of hurt a lot too. It was my problem. It was something that I had to deal with by myself, and it is hard to deal with, and it's something that I don't like to talk about because I have talked about it just so little. But I mean, that's part of the problem. That's something that has to change if anything's gonna get better.
I think maybe talking about it a lot more could change the situation.
It's never gonna change unless people realize it and recognize it and start talking about it and not be afraid of it.
Explaining to people why rape culture is bad, what harm it does to our society, not just for girls but for boys as well, because they play an equal part. A lot of people think it's just girls. You just have to protect girls, but you have to protect boys too. You have to kind of break down the roles that boys and girls have.
You know, rape as an idea is a lot more complicated than people think.
Sometimes it could be a little boy and a grown woman, or it could be a little boy and a grown man, or it could be two women. It really is just, you can be any color, any gender, any orientation, any age. You could be affected by it. When it happened to my sister, we weren't allowed to speak to the little girl that it happened to. We weren't allowed to speak to their family anymore. And at first, it was just like we weren't allowed to go to their house. And then it became, they can't even come to our house. At one point, they just didn't even want to be reminded of what happened.
It can vary widely based on the person and how they were functioning prior to the assault. And unfortunately, on the worst case scenario, it can follow someone for the rest of their lives.
Whether you're the victim, you think about it, I feel like you think about it on the darkest nights, the coldest nights when you're alone and there's nothing going on in your head. You sometimes can flash back to it and think about it. So I know that me and my sister have talked about it a lot since it has happened, but we only talk about it when we're sleeping in the same room by ourselves. I feel like it's something that never leaves you. It's always there. It almost scars you.
For me, the hardest part following sexual abuse, surprisingly, it wasn't the act itself. It was the repercussions that happened afterward that I think really got me. I come from a very close-knit family, so naturally the adults talk and they share things. And so whenever I was 14, I told my mom what had happened to me when I was 7. And after that, you know, she talked to her best friend, my aunt. And before I knew it, most of the family knew what happened to me. And the looks that I got from those that I cared about the most was probably the worst part of the whole thing.
I've had 7 years to think about it. And there are certain things that have gotten easier. You know, people, they don't talk about it anymore because it's old news. Who cares now? But there are some things that have gotten even harder, such as like trusting people.
I think the hardest part is knowing, like, if you've been there, you could have changed something. And I feel like I feel the need to protect my sister now. Like, I need to be with her all the time. And that's, for me, that's the hardest thing, is not being there when I felt like I should have been there.
I've known way too many people who have been through this and haven't been able to get help or proper help.
There isn't a class you can take in school. There's hardly even sex ed in school. If someone tells you, hey, you've been raped, they don't tell you there's this number you can call, the police can help you do this, and if this happens, these are your options.
Parents will forget to consider the reality that it will happen, that it does happen, and so a lot of times people aren't educated onto or about what they should do after something like that happens.
They tell you it's wrong, but they don't tell you what happens afterwards.
Even though it stays with you, life doesn't stop there. There is light at the end of the tunnel. There is hope.
I'm gonna be cheesy and I'm gonna bring up this quote. A wise man plants a tree that he knows he's not gonna stand in the shade of. So basically, although I know that saying something now isn't gonna change how society is today, but my children and my children's children will be able to stand in the shade of the change that I made now. I feel like attention should be brought to this because I want my family to be protected in the future. And I feel like not only my family, but people around the country, like people around the world even. There's women in different countries who don't get any kind of protection at all. But if it just starts somewhere, it can grow, and the world will eventually realize how horrible this is, how making jokes makes everything worse, how ignoring it really makes everything worse, and eventually a change will be brought about. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, it may not be in the next year or even 10 years, but eventually it will grow. And I feel like that's the reason why we should bring attention to it now.
If I had to give one piece of advice to somebody who has gone or will go through this at some point.
If you have gone through this, I suggest going and getting help from someone. If it's a doctor or a counselor or a friend.
If nobody talks about why rape culture is bad, they're gonna keep making the same mistake until eventually rape is just gonna be one joke.
Speak up, talk about it. Tell your friends, even if it's just one friend, just your closest friend, talk about it. Try to make it a different choice than what most of us made.
Speak up. Don't be silent. If it happens to you at any point in time, the best thing you can do to assure that it will happen to somebody else is by keeping your mouth shut. So if it happens to you, open up. Tell somebody, preferably the police, but anybody, and the person that has done it to you will most likely get caught.